Hey everyone, I am back with Corey. Say hi, Corey.
Hey, how's it going?
And we added some cool new moves to the hero character here. And so first we'll just show you the moves, and then we'll review the new events and the changes to previously existing events that make this all possible. So the first thing to cover is if you press down, the character can now duck, and of course when you let go of down, he stands back up. And you can still do the uppercut by holding down, so now you can do it either from a stand or if you're ducking. And then if you hold down and forward on an angle, you can change the direction you're facing while ducked. And if you press attack in this state while holding down forward, you do a regular punch, but a ducking one, I should say, a ducking punch. And then the last thing, which is really cool, is we can now do, let's get a bird on screen, evasive rolling. And we can chain that. The other really cool thing about evasive rolling is we can actually go under. Let's find one of the birdmen that throws, actually the first sub-boss set is here, so I can roll right under the weapons they throw and counter-attack them. And then let's get back to that original Birdman that does not throw things. And the one other thing I want to mention about the roll is since you're a big, fairly heavy guy with heavy armor, we decided that if you roll into an on-land enemy, it actually bumps into them and knocks them off guard a bit. And so what was happening at first is you could do the roll, but if you rolled into one of those enemies, you would get hurt and fly back and they'd be completely unaffected. And that was just really not enjoyable when that happened.
Right, yeah.
So we had a discussion and realized he should, that the enemy should bounce back and you basically stop in your forward momentum. And that,
and that ties, just as a side note, that ties into sort of the reason we felt even just the need for the duck in the first place is despite you using down to do some moves and stuff like the uppercut, it did feel weird when you were just kind of standing there or walking and you hit down and nothing happens.
Yeah,
it felt like it needed that feedback from a control standpoint.
Right.
So and then it sparked our thoughts on the things he could do with that.
And it feels so much better. Your character feels so much more like he's in control of his body and combat. The fact that, and the other cool thing is if you're just ducking, let me just duck, that weapon should hit me in the face. But if I time my roll nicely, because the roll is lower than the duck, you can go under it. So you still have to use fairly careful timing. So it works great for gameplay. So anyway, those are the new things, and we are going to review how we actually made all that happen. So to start with, of course, to get new moves into the character in Construct, we first need to add those new move animations into his Spriter project. So you can see I made some quick placeholder animations, and so the first one I added was Roll. And there's his evasive roll, which didn't take that many frames. This game is kind of designed to be retro and to have a very specific, not super smoothly animated kind of visual style to it. The finished version probably won't need any additional frames, just those frames need to be improved. And of course that's a non-looping animation. And you could see the body collision box is very small. That's how he's able to roll under the thrown projectile weapons. And then we have roll end. I should explain why I added a separate animation. But in general, it goes immediately, and you'll see in the events, from roll to roll end. And what I can do with that, eventually, I haven't done this yet, is make it so during roll end, it could spawn a dust cloud, like he's sort of skidding himself to a stop at the end of the roll. And we could, like right now in his code, which you'll see soon, when he's rolling, he's moving at a fixed horizontal velocity. And then what we could do during that very brief roll end animation, we could make it so he slides to a stop to a small degree instead of stopping dead. So that's another possible thing we could do with that. But you'll see right now in the code, you initiate the roll, he does that animation and moves, and then he displays roll end for that split second. And then there's to duck, which is simply a very fast animation This is a partially crouched frame that's lower than the lowest idle pose. And then you have this completely ducked pose at the very end. And so it's just enough to make it look a little smoother and not just be like this instant teleport pop. So then you have duck, which is the same. Oh, I just noticed. I'll have to fix that eventually. Right here, this should be down 1 pixel, but it doesn't matter right now. And then duck is just a... Yep, go ahead, Corey.
Oh, I was going to say, I do appreciate how with the roll you took into account his mass with going to the side, as opposed to like the typical, like person trying to scrunch into a ball,
exactly,
like bending forward sort of thing.
Yeah, like literally the tucked in head, perfect. Like,
it adds some dimension to it, and like because he's so big, that would look pretty funny, in
it would look silly.
Not a good way for this game.
So. That's exactly right. You can pull it off with a more cartoony game or a super light, agile character.
Right.
But it would just look very silly. And this is more in keeping with a heavier weight wrestler kind of drop and roll. Those kind of decisions are very important. Is the animation you're making, does it match with the character? With the physicality and the personality. And then there's roll end, which I already talked about. So there's duck. And then duck is just a looping animation. And you just stay ducked so long as you have down held down. And then there's the duck punch. And the only tricky thing about this is it needed its collision attack box, and it needed a little spawning point, which is where it spawns the whatever sort of attack blur or attack effect is appropriate. Either the normal metallic-y colored one if he does not have the gauntlet power, or the flame one, for example, in level 1. And then stand up, which is just standing back up from duck, which, as you can see, it just, oh, wow, that's actually doesn't make any sense. It basically would never display this frame. Mm-hmm. So I'll have to fix that too. Like, it should only be this frame for the entire duration.
Right.
So I'll fix that later anyway. But yeah, and then that's it. Those are the new animations. But let's leave it open just in case we have to reference back to it. And let's start looking at the actual events. So the first set of events we're going to look at are in gameplay events, which are universal to all of the actual playable levels of the game, including the boss fights. And I can just start searching for specific keywords to filter out events we don't need to look at. So the first one will be duck. And so you can see here, set animation to 2 ducks. So this is the introduction to, that split second introductory animation. Mm-hmm. So it simply says if the player is not stuck in a move with that variable we created that keeps, it's like a super simple state machine. If the player is on the floor and they're holding down, then we set the animation to 2 duck and we set stuck and move to 1. This is really important because if we didn't set stuck and move to 1, he would just keep looping the 2 duck animation as you hold it down. He would just keep flickering, standing and ducked and so on. But anyway, so then we set his vector X, which is his horizontal movement. So I made it basically, so even if you have a little inertia horizontally, like you're walking, as soon as you press down, he's going to immediately come to a stop. That's just going to give the player more precise control, which might come in really handy in other gameplay aspects later on in the game. Let's say you're walking and you need to duck under something, but also maybe a projectile is coming from above, so you need to place yourself really carefully in between. Or maybe some level will have like spikes that come up through the floor, so you really need that precision to be able to stop on a dime, as they say.
Yeah, and that contrasts the actual roll move, which is the evasive downward. So it's like, Great point. It needs to be that way. Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah.
Great point. Okay, so and then if the duck animation is playing, but the player is not holding up or down. So this value up or down, it's 0 if the player is neither holding up nor down, and it's a negative number, usually -1 if the player is holding up, and it's positive number, usually 1 if they're holding down. So you can see it says if that value is less than or equal to 0, which means they're either pressing up or nothing at all, they shouldn't be ducking anymore. So we set the animation to stand up. All right. And keep in mind, his value is stuck in move right now because he was ducking, and it's going to continue to be stuck in move 1 while the stand-up animation is playing because we've not set it to 0 at this point. So that means none of his other, like, idle or walk or none of those other animations will kind of hijack it and take it over because those moves require your value stuck in move to be 0. So he will play the stand-up animation, and then we have when the 2-duck, when he's starting to duck, that super short animation, as soon as it finishes playing, it'll automatically transition to the duck animation. And then, so we're going to have to zoom in on this one, but somewhere there has to be something that says when stand up is finished, set the animation to idle, or at least set stuck and move to 0, and then it would automatically go to idle. Because if the player's not moving and they're not stuck in move and they're on the ground, there's already code, for, the old code that would make it go to idle. All right, so let's quickly find, let me just, we're not looking for 2-duck, we're looking for stand up, right? So when that's finished. So, here it is. So is stand up finished, play idle, and set stuck and move to 0, right? But theoretically I could delete this or negate it and it would still work because as soon as that's 0, the game knows he's not moving and he's not stuck in a move and he's on the ground, so he would play idle anyway. So let's go back to duck and let's see if there's anything else we need to look at. Oh yeah, there's this one I said I need to expand. So 41, let's look at 41. So if his animation is either duck or 2-duck or stand up and left or right input is, so this means he's holding down and he's ducking. And then this means he's also holding, in this case, to the right, or in this case, to the left. So this is how down angle lets you change which direction you're looking. So while you're ducking, you could face any way you want by holding either down angle. And this is exactly what does it. So if he's holding to the right, set left or right, which is a value that keeps track of which direction he's facing, to 1, which 1 means facing to the right, -1 means facing to the left. And then you set the actual spriter object that displays the character and all his animations. You set that to not mirror, because as you can see here, he's facing to the right by default, so not mirrored. And then when you press to the left, it's going to start mirroring it, so the character is now facing to the left, and it sets left to right to -1. So that all makes sense. So let's go back to searching this way. That's what that was. And then, so here we have the duck punch, which I just took the code from regular punch and I copied that event and I just altered what was necessary to make it for ducking. So you could see here, if the attack button is pressed, which is B2, and the player is on the floor, and they're not, oh, that's interesting. Oh, left or right is not 0, which means the player is definitely holding to the left or the right, right? Because it would be -1 if it were to the left and +1 if it were to the right. So the player is holding left or right, and either the animation duck or 2-duck or roll end is playing. Then we set stuck and move to 1, which technically isn't necessary, because if any of these animations are playing, it's already 1. So theoretically, I could get rid of that, but we might as well leave it in just to be really careful. And then we set the actual hero's animation to duck punch, and we play the audio for, which is the same, that's from the regular punch, just the whoosh sound of a big gauntleted fist flying through the air at a fairly rapid speed. We are going to add, and I haven't done this yet, there's going to be an actual little brief countdown that will stop a player from being able to spam on roll, so that you can't just keep rolling through the whole level really quickly, because that's the fastest move. So after you roll, there's going to be some amount of time, a second or two, where you can't just roll immediately again. So there's going to be that. But at the same time, even though we don't want the player to be able to spam roll, like over and over again, we still want it so that the player can really plan a really cool roll under the boomerang and then immediately uppercut the enemy or punch the enemy or jump out of the way of something. So we needed to find that sensible spot during the roll where you could basically cancel out of the roll and do your punch or do the uppercut so that your character really feels properly responsive and doesn't feel like he's kind of unnaturally gummed up in something, like at the end of the roll. So you could see I cloned that exact same event here, and I just changed it so instead of checking for either of those animations, we check only for this specific animation if the player is rolling and the frame is greater than or equal to the second keyframe of the roll animation, then he can also do the duck punch. All right, all that making sense so far, Corey?
Yeah,
I think it's all okay. Awesome. And now this is what triggers the actual roll, and you can see we're using button 1, which is jump, instead of button 2, which is attack. But otherwise, it's very similar. Is the character on the floor? Are they holding down? Is the animation duck or to duck? And again, this is redundant because if these animations are playing, the player is holding down. So theoretically, I could delete that as well. But anyway, sometimes it's kind of nice to have redundant stuff to be safe and so that the logic is super obvious. But anyway, so you're ducked, and then you press the jump button. And again, this same thing. This stuck in move would already be 1, so that's redundant. Set animation to roll. And then, actually, there's one thing here. Oh yeah, no, that's good. So you saw with punching or the attack button, if you're holding straight down, you're going to do the uppercut. But if you're holding down forward, you're going to do the regular duck punch. So we had to differentiate and be careful in the code. Like, for the uppercut, we have to make sure you're not pressing left and right at the same time as holding down.
Right.
And for a second I thought, oh yeah, why didn't I do that for this? But you should be able to roll with the jump button regardless of if you're holding forward or not. So that's why I don't check. We don't care if they're holding forward or not. You're going to roll if you are holding down and press jump. So, and then we just change animation to roll, and we play the whoosh sound effect. That doesn't belong there. Eventually I'll make a custom sound effect for it, but that's just a leftover because I copied and pasted the punch code.
That's just you recording yourself, isn't it? Saying whoosh.
Yes. All sound effects are me being, what was that guy's name? Bobby McFerrin or Body McFerrin? The guy,
Right.
don't worry. It's just me doing all the sound effects. So, and then of course, whenever we trigger an animation, especially when the player ends up stuck in a move for that animation, we always need to make sure that we get them back out of that move. So on animation, duck punch is finished. We can't see the rest of this, which is silly. I think, let's double check. So 50, let's go down to 50. Yeah, we couldn't see it, which is really arbitrary. Okay, so once it's finished, and this is interesting, I didn't want to make it so that the character pops back to idle when they just finish a duck punch. So I just made it really careful so that if you're still holding down, if you're not holding down, he'll immediately go to stand up animation, so he's getting back up. But if you're still holding down, he'll go perfectly back to duck seamlessly, so he doesn't pop back up in a weird way or anything like that. So that's what that does. And then we have similar stuff for roll. So on roll finished, we switch to roll end. And then once roll end is finished, same thing. We double check. So same thing on animation roll end is finished. We double check if they're holding down or not. And if they're not holding down, stuck and move to 0, stand the character back up. Actually, yeah, theoretically, this should not be here. So I will fix that, because that would just immediately make the stand-up animation disappear because idle would take over. So stuck and move should stay 1.
Is that why it looked like he was just popping, like it wasn't playing the stand-up?
Yeah.
It seemed that way when you were playing.
And remember I mentioned that I have a mistake in this animation. Look at ducked. This is fully ducked, and this is the stand-up animation. And it doesn't display the actual standing up in between frame until the end, which is just a really dumb oversight on my part.
Right.
So that literally,
second.
It's not even a second. That would be literally 1,000th of a second or less. So yeah, that's why that's not showing up. But that also would make it so after a roll, it would not show up. So that should not have been there. We just needed to make sure that when stand up is finished. So if I search for, remember we're at line 54. But so stand up. It's like this, right? Stand up. So on stand up finished, then you set stuck and move to 0. That's better.
Right.
All right, so let's go back to, were we still searching for duck or was it roll at this point? It can be roll, but anyway, 50.
Yeah.
Because I think we covered.
Is where you were at.
Exactly. So on roll and finish, we already covered. Okay, so here's some new stuff. So 57. It's quite annoying I have to do this. Maybe there is a way for it to show you the rest of the event. That's annoying. Anyway, no big deal for now. So 57 is the current animation roll. So if the player is facing to the right, we simulate the controller being pressed to the right. That's what gives it the actual forward momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And then we set the vector x immediately to 300, which makes him moving quickly. And then same thing here. If he's holding to the left, we simulate pressing to the left, and we set vector x to 300. And then also is current animation roll. This should be combined. I'm going to fix that right now. This should be in the same event. So if he's rolling, then we set the maximum speed to, and this is another thing to cover, I added a new alterable value to the player box called roll speed. That way we don't have hard-coded numbers that if we want to tweak it, we need to fish through the events and change the hard-coded number. We could just find the player box in the editor and change it just there. It's so much easier and faster to iterate to make the speed of the roll perfect.
Yeah.
So that's why I made it a variable. Well, obviously, I could have hard-coded it, but then it just makes it way less convenient to perfect the movement speed. So anyway, so if animation is rolling, we set the maximum movement speed to the roll speed, which is higher than the maximum movement is set to while the player is just walking. So you'll see here, if the hero is not playing the roll animation, then we set his maximum movement speed back to another variable we had set up before, which is the player's normal max speed, right? Which is the walking speed, basically. And then, let's see, we're not filtering anything out. So let's go to Uppercut. So you'll see I also had to add in, this is the thing where the flaming gauntlet power effect, the particle effect, we don't want it to be visible during a lot of different animations, like the attacks and stuff.
Yeah.
So you'll see I just added Duck Punch here. All of the other relevant animations were already there, but I just added Duck Punch so that that particle effect is not visible during the new attack. And then, so you'll see we had to add a few things here. Specifically, I copied, so now you can do the uppercut specifically out of either 2-duck, duck, or roll end. So it's no longer, are you stuck in move 0? It used to say if the player is not stuck in move. Now technically he can only do it if he's stuck in the move called duck or 2-duck or roll end. Oops.
Right.
It's my phone for some reason. Sorry about that. And then, so that's what we had to change. We got rid of stuck in move equals 0, and we made it, those are the specific animations that you can indeed do the uppercut from. And then all the rest is the same. You trigger the uppercut. And then, but we also added that thing, remember, just like Duck Punch, we want you to be able to cancel out of the last frame of the roll. So I just copied that once I was done with it. And everything's the same, except now, instead of this animation or this animation or this animation, it is simply, are they playing roll and is the frame greater than or equal to 2? Then the same thing as before, you just trigger the uppercut. But then I remembered any particular...
Cool, so you're actually, in that, you're actually referencing the frame of the Spriter file.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
cool, yeah.
And it's really cool. With the Spriter plugin and with Spriter, you can check based on actual time in milliseconds. So you could say we could say if there weren't enough frames, or if the frames were actually smoothly tweened, we could actually we could actually scrub through the nice smooth tweened animation, right? And say this is exactly when you should be able to cancel out of it because he's mostly back upright. And then we could look at what that time is and say, oh look, it's 239 milliseconds. So what we could do is say 239 milliseconds. There's a check for that too. You could say, is the current animation time greater or equal to 239 milliseconds? So the Spriter plugin gives you awesome control of detecting exactly what point of an animation the player is in. But in my case, since he's choppily animated, it made perfect sense to just do it based on an actual keyframe.
Yeah.
So that's how that
yeah,
works.
I mean, and that's a case too where if you wanted to make the code simpler like that, just detecting a frame, if you needed the timing adjusted, you could always, fiddle with the animation itself and adjust the timing if you had to, or to balance the look versus the timing.
Right. Like in
and I think your thought behind that was like, if the player's like does a roll, but maybe they need to not finish it or something because they might slam into whatever.
Right, exactly. Like we want it so that the player feels like they're never gummed up when they shouldn't be. Like at this point in a roll, any human could start throwing their fist out. You know what I mean? And could start adjusting their thing. So that's you don't want it to feel like, oh, the game has a bug. It ignored my attack button press.
Yeah, right? Or even, I guess you could even do it almost evasively, like if one of those Falcon guys has his sword just ready to, he's going to hit you, and you got to stop and then go back the other way or something.
Or you need to roll because you're close to him, but he just threw the boomerang, so you need to roll to get under it. But if you're forced to do the entire roll, luckily now you'll at least
you'll
bump
just
the
bump
Birdman.
into his
right. But it's nice, right? But it's nice now that you've got that extra leeway where you could do a quick roll and uppercut out of it quite quickly in a natural sense, like not too quickly. That wouldn't make any sense with this big burly guy. He just started the roll and then he could magically teleport right out of it. This is finding that perfect visual in what feels right for gameplay.
It gives the player a window of time toward the end of the roll to pull those sorts of things off, and gives them, and if they master it, they can time it more or less and things like that. So it adds a lot of what's the term, nuance, you could say, to the control of the character. I like that a lot.
And if we let him interrupt it any sooner, it would literally feel like a bug. So anyway. So that's why we did that, and that is it for most of it all of it in the gameplay event sheet. But then I remembered for each level you might be able to do an uppercut. So we have special code for when you initiate an uppercut, and you have the gauntlet power for that level. So I had to go into. I remembered I specifically made an event sheet just for firepower. So I just went into firepower and I searched for uppercut, and then I just altered this code in the exact same way. You could see it's checking for those very specific animations instead of is not stuck in move, because now you can't do it if your stuck in move is 0, right? So we did the same exact change, and then I just made a copy of this and added it down here, and this is if roll is playing and current frame is greater than or equal to 2. So same exact thing. It's just the other way you can initiate the uppercut right out of the end of the roll animation.
Nice.
And then that is it for the uppercut. And the last thing I think we need to cover is the Birdman getting bumped by the roll. So I think I just need to check for roll if I'm here in the level. Oh no, I'm in the wrong event sheet. I need to go to level 1 events, because this is specific to the Birdman, and then just search roll. And then you'll see I just copied and pasted one of the events for if the Birdman gets hit by the hero attacking, and I just changed it so instead of the attack box that the hero has for their attack animations, it's just a regular body box. And then, which you could see, I'll go back to the Spriter thing for just a second. Every animation has this box 000, which represents the collidable part of the body. And then attacks have not only that animation, let's see, like duck punch, not only that box, but it also has an attack box. Right. So we're specifically checking just against the body box, which is this, is overlapping the body box of the Birdman, and then is role playing, and then trigger once, and then we, for this regular Birdman, we just set his animation to hit and do all of the things that we do for when we make the Birdman get hit, except I deleted away the event that takes away some of the Birdman's hit points. Because we want it to sort of stun him for a second, but not actually hurt him.
Right.
But everything else is the same as when he gets hit. And then I just had to do this for every variant of the Birdman. There's regular Birdman. There's Alt Birdman, which is the one that throws the little boomerang.
Mm-hmm.
Same exact stuff, same exact logic. And then same exact thing again for the Birdman sub-boss. So you'll see.
A thought I had here, just as a creative idea, is you could make it to where if the alternate Birdmen still have a shield and you haven't destroyed it yet, they could actually
block it
instead of getting stunned. Like they hold their shield down, and it's like,
right.
And it wouldn't hurt you, but just it's a more abrupt, like, right. They don't move.
They wouldn't. Yeah, they wouldn't be stunned. You would stop moving, so they could theoretically then attack you pretty quickly.
If that seems realistic, I don't know. Based on the way they look, I don't know if that would look right. But
yeah, like once we get this perfected, we definitely need to both play test it, and like it'll really jump out at us if those things would be a really good addition. So, but that's a great idea. Keep that in mind for when you're playtesting. Okay, and that's the same stuff. And then the other thing I needed to check is in here, when the player bumps into the any of the humanoid enemies, the player will get bumped back. So you see he places getting hit animation, he gets stuck in move. Oh, and we do subtract, currently we subtract 1 from hit points. I'm actually thinking for the Birdmen, just because you bump, I don't think you should really lose a hit point. Like you should, you should when you attack. So we'll keep that in mind, and we might remove that. But anyway, the point is, we don't want this to happen. You should not get bumped if you're rolling into them. They should get bumped, right? And not you. So I just had to add that check. Among these other things that were already there, roll end and roll, during those you do not get bumped.
Cool.
And I have the same exact thing. I just added that check for animation roll for each version. So here it is here, animation roll, and that's it. That's how all of the new behavior works. And previously I had said that our next video, which is this one, would have me adding the ability for the player to be able to punch and deflect the boomerangs, but I haven't done that yet. I did make it now so that if you stun any of the Birdmen, they can't, if they're stunned, they can't catch the boomerang they threw. So the boomerang that they threw will actually stick into them and hurt them. So I programmed that as far as it doing damage, but I don't think I reviewed that yet and covered it yet, because I want to add, not only will it hit them and take hit points away, but it'll actually, like, I'm going to create a new sprite that looks like their sword stuck in them, and will actually stick that sprite to the character as they're sliding back with the hit animation. So once I do that, then we'll readdress that. And at the same time, before we do the next video, I'll also finally make it so that the player can actually block by punching the boomerang weapon, which will destroy the weapon. And then we're going to make it so that, depending on what kind of Birdman they are, they can either draw a new one from a magic cartoon place behind their back, or they'll just be forced to resort to hand combat with their claws instead of
you could, and I know it complicates it some, but you could make it to where he can hit the boomerangs if he's got the gauntlet, but if he doesn't, maybe it actually still hurts him or something. Like,
that's a great point.
His bare fist. I mean, that might add a little more incentive to getting the power and making you feel more powerful in those instances.
That's
I don't know,
a great
though,
point.
with the first fight,
Yeah.
you can get the power before that first fight, right?
Right.
Like the first sub boss.
Yeah.
I was assuming you could, so
Yeah.
I don't know. Just a thought. If
That's a
it's
really great
not
thought,
too
and
difficult to, yeah.
I originally drew his standard attack blur animation
Mhm.
when I assumed, like, originally he was always going to have a gauntlet. And then we designed, oh, you have different magical powers, and, like, it's just a bracelet to emphasize when you earn the gauntlet.
Right.
So that reminds me, we should readdress the basic attack blur to use skin tones instead of the blue. And that's a great idea. I love that idea that when you gain the gauntlet, you've also gained... Because, like, it doesn't make sense to punch with your raw fist, to punch a sword that's been thrown at you and deflect slash break it. So
yeah, no
and
matter
like
how
that,
big you are, it's
yeah,
like that's
it's stupid, and that adds a nice bonus, additional ability once you've earned the gauntlet. So I really like that idea. So I'll write that down on a list once we're done recording, which is pretty much now, unless you have any other last minute thoughts.
No, I believe that's it. This is all looking good. I can't wait to test it. I'll let you know if I have any feedback, though. So.
Awesome. All right. So that's it. Thanks, everyone, very much for watching, and we should be back relatively soon with the next video.
If you enjoy our content and want to keep up to date on our games, please leave a like and subscribe. Also, if you want to support our projects, consider becoming a patron. The link's in the description, and we'll see you soon.